A very good evening to all our viewers, and thank you again for joining us tonight for the agenda. My name is Toivo Njebela, your host. Tonight I'm very excited because I'm having a very informative conversation lined up. Having in studio Harald Hecht, who is chairperson of the Forum of German-speaking Namibians, and Mr. Vetumbuavi Mungunda, who is obviously a very known business leader in the country and a descendant of the Ovaherero genocide victims. Harald, welcome to the show. Thank you for making time.
Thank you, Toivo. We welcome every platform as the Forum of German-speaking Namibians to make ourselves better known and to explain our aims and objectives. And this is obviously a very topical issue.
Yes, thank you very much. Vetu, thank you also for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here.
Wonderful. And, wonderful. So, Harald, you went to State House last week as a forum. You engaged the president and his officials on a variety of issues. What came out of that meeting, in terms of the headlines that we saw, was, I think, also, I think you engaged the president on a variety of issues, but the one that caught the attention of the media mostly was genocide, where you also express your views and what you think as a forum, what must happen going forward. Maybe tell us first about what the forum is about and just the nature of that visit.
Yes. The forum was finally founded on 22 April 2021.
Yeah.
It was delayed exactly by 1 year through the events of COVID-19.
Yeah.
But there has been a desire among the German-speaking Namibians to become more engaged in society as a whole, not just being withdrawn in their comfort zone, as might have been the perception. And also there have been calls from our political leaders. Hifikepunye Pohamba, the former president, said that the Germans are a tribe, the German-speaking Namibians are a tribe without a leader. And President Hage Geingob has called on everybody to become a part of the Namibian House. So those two comments prompted us. There have been others as well. And obviously, the German-speaking population of Namibia has got special privileges, and I'm deliberately calling it privileges because of history. But we are here to stay in this country. So we see ourselves as part and parcel of having moved into the Namibian House now through the forum.
Yes.
I'm a fourth generation Namibian. My children are in the fifth generation Namibia, and my grandchild, which will be born in 2 to 3 weeks' time, will be the sixth generation in Namibia. So we regard ourselves as part and parcel of Namibia, and we've got no other home than Namibia. So this is why the forum got together and said, we must be seen to be engaging with everybody. And obviously the topical matter of the genocide is now very topical. It's very prominently in the media. But there are also other topics that might relate even to that, like the structural inequality that we got in our society, which also relates back to the genocide of 1904 to 1908. Then there is apartheid, 30 years of government of the current Republic of Namibia. So there are various issues. We want to hear the other groups, we want to engage in dialogue, but we also want to be heard. And on the genocide topic in particular, we've been hearing basically all the parties involved, except the German government directly. And this is why we are now in a position to comment on that topical issue, on that very emotional issue. And we realize that it will take a long time before we can put this one to bed. And this is why we are watching the current proceedings in the National Assembly with big interest, because it will affect our social justice and peace in Namibia.
Thank you very much for that very elaborate answer, Harald. Vetu, you've been quite vocal on the subject of genocide yourself. You are one of the parties that are on record criticizing, for example, the reparation deal that has been reached by the two governments, and of course it's in Parliament this week. Give us a sense of your overall take on that subject.
Yeah. No, I maybe want to go back to what Mr. Hecht said earlier.
Yes.
I think this is a very emotional issue.
Yeah.
It carries lots of emotions for many, many people.
Yeah.
And these emotions go back generations.
Yeah.
And these are emotions that have been left with us and left with many of the victims
Yeah.
of the genocide for many generations. It's generational trauma.
Yeah.
It's generational displacement, both in terms of where one actually finds themselves,
Yeah.
but also in terms of family patterns where, my brother to my great-grandmother actually ended up in Botswana. That family group is still in Botswana. So these are generational issues of emotions, of livelihoods, of displacements, of trauma, in terms of the detail of the issues that were narrated over generations. So it was always going to be a very emotional issue, I think, first and foremost. And I think the issue around how one to approach this is an issue that has to be approached not as a transactional conversation.
Yeah.
It has to be approached with a genuine intention to heal wounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those wounds can only be healed between the victims
Yeah.
or descendants of the victims and the perpetrators.
Yeah. Yeah.
And unfortunately, that has been lacking, and it is lacking, and it's going to be lacking until the protagonists in the conversations and in the negotiations actually understand that. So I think that's been probably the biggest challenge that we have seen. So, and as a result, whatever the outcome is that are being discussed in Parliament this week, it's going to be platonic until there's a genuine interest in healing wounds.
Indeed. Thank you, Vetu. So, Harald, when you said at State House that as a country we needed to conclude this matter one way or another, so that for the sake of peace and stability and everything that comes with that, what did you mean?
Okay, let me just quickly get back to Mr. Mungunda's comment. The healing of the wounds, we also see that as a big task, and especially sensitizing the German-speaking community about issues like that, because it takes everybody to join hands and move forward, preferably to the benefit of Namibia. So the sensitizing of our German-speaking citizens, Namibian citizens, is very of paramount importance to us, and this is why we've deliberately called ourselves Forum of German-Speaking Namibians, but we are Namibians. Okay. Of
course, yes.
Yes, you see, there is a so-called joint declaration on the table. Now, what do you make of that? You've got people that are against it, and it's their good democratic right to be against it. You've got people that are in favor of it. And we've spoken to both parties, and we've also spoken, we had the honor still of speaking to the late Dr. Zedin Gavirwa, who was the chief negotiator for Namibia, as you all know. And by the way, who was, from what I remember, applauded by all circles of the affected communities, if I remember correctly, when he was appointed as being the right candidate. So given that, and the fact that the negotiations have taken place 6 years and seem to have reached deadlock on several occasions, an agreement where a few key factors, which I would like to single out, have been reached, can be used as a basis, could be used as a basis, obviously, but it is subject to the bilateral acceptance of both parliaments, and currently it is for discussion in the Namibian parliament. The fact that Germany is using the word genocide now, albeit from today's perspective, the fact that Namibia is using the word apology, and the fact that Namibia is talking about financial compensation is already a step in the right direction. Now, I'm a businessman. What approach do I take when it comes to an agreement? Do I say I don't recognize it, I just disagree? Or do I say it is, and I hear what Junius is saying, it's not a commercial deal, it's not a commercial transaction. I'm very much on this. Or do we say it is a deal is better than no deal? Will the German government allow improvements or further negotiations? currently we've got a joint declaration. We haven't got a reconciliation agreement as such. The joint declaration serves as the basis for the reconciliation agreement, which still has to be signed. But those are the first points that were agreed upon. When I speak to certain parties or groups that are in favor of the current agreement or the current joint declaration, everybody is saying from a monetary point of view, it will never be enough. It can never be enough. Okay. But there is also the hope that the German government will improve over time on their current monetary offer. The fact that not all affected communities took part in the negotiations, from what I hear and from what I understand, again, we haven't spoken to representatives of the German government as yet, is that everybody had the chance to take part, but there are contradicting assertions to that, and maybe somebody can help me on that. What really happened, how the final negotiating team of Namibia was put together. But I've read articles in the German media, and Mr. Ruprecht Pollens has been quoted as saying that whenever he came to Namibia, he tried and contacted all the leaders also of the groups that were actually against the talks from day one. And he also mentioned one thing, and that was the absorption capacity of Namibia to implement, execute, and to finalize projects, which also might have played a role in this whole project and this whole joint declaration. But we know that the process of reconciliation, if on the assumption that this joint declaration would be turned into a reconciliation agreement, both parties sign it, we know that the process of reconciliation has only started now, and that it will take years. And the German-speaking community of Namibia must become visibly involved in the reconciliation process. This is something that we take very much to heart.
Definitely, thank you. Do you want to say something back to Harald, especially on Harald, and I'm saying Harald, especially on how this deal is structured? Some people agreeing with it, but of course, people like yourself, you definitely do not agree. Let's talk about the approach, maybe, Mr. Mungunda.
No, let me maybe just start off with, I think, the forum itself. I think, as Harald said earlier, it is actually quite good that the German-speaking Namibians come forth and start to engage in local issues and in Namibian issues. But I would actually like us to maybe just caution that when those engagements do take place, that they engage on those issues with all the sensitivity that it deserves. So first of all, one would actually want to understand how this forum actually engages on the genocide, how they engage as, whether they are engaging as victims of the genocide issue, are they engaging as an affected group of people, are they engaging as beneficiaries of the genocide, are they engaging as benefactors, are they engaging as perpetrators of the genocide? Or are they engaging as any other group of Namibians? And that could have been any of the other groups in Namibia, political parties, other ethnic groups that might not have been directly affected. I think that clarity is important, and because there's quite a lot of sensitivities, because I think just to start off with is, when our forefathers started to engage around these issues, and many of them perished over years, and they said that they actually disagreed with Harald said, that it has to be concluded one way or the other. They said this is a generational debate. What is important is justice. Whether it takes 100 years, whether it takes 200 years, what's important is that we find justice. But they never took this issue up with the local German-speaking Namibians. And there was a reason for that, because they knew that the genocide was perpetrated by a state, and that was the state of Germany. And all their engagements and all their fury and everything was always directed at the state of Germany. They left all the German-speaking Namibians here with all the luxuries that they enjoy. So that fury was never against individuals in Namibia. It was against the state of Germany. And there was a reason for that, and that's because the authority always came from a state, and whatever happened, and if someone actually happened to have benefited from that, was because it was because of the acts and orders that were given by state. So how we engage that, I think, is going to be quite important, that we understand the sensitivities with which this issue comes. And I think it extends to the spirit of the debates and the discussions. I think Harald is speaking very authoritatively on things that I don't think he has all the information on. And that's unfortunate, and that's also what Germany has been doing. And particularly Ambassador Polenz, that was referred to earlier, is he will speak authoritatively about the political and social structures of the Ovaherero people. What maybe people don't appreciate is the fact that there might have been a process. There might have been some people that were part of a process. But the majority of the affected communities were definitely not part of the process. And the reason was what clear is that if you want us to heal, we need to negotiate ourselves. We need to be part of that. And we're not saying that government should not be there. Government is quite a significantly interested party. They need to be there. But if you would really want real healing, it is important that there is a process where the affected communities can talk on their own behalf, can talk for themselves, and can talk about their demands and the type of justice that they want.
I hear you. We will go on a quick break, and then I will give Harald an opportunity to respond to what Mr. Mungunda has said. We are continuing with the agenda. I'm joined by Vetumbuavi Mungunda and Harald Hecht. Of course, the topic is mostly genocide, which is topical in the country right now and also doing rounds in our parliament. Harald, before we went on a break, Mr. Mungunda made some observations from his own perspective, for example, around the understanding of the German-speaking community of this subject. How much do you think people within your community understand this subject?
You see, we've only started in April 2021, then we've had a COVID-19 related break of 2 months, so we are really out in the starting blocks. But just to answer on Junior's question, what hat are we wearing? We've definitely been we are one of the privileged communities of Namibia, and I mentioned that right in the beginning. There might be certain sections of the German-speaking community who say, no, they've been losing out since independence, but if I look at all the statistics, Gini coefficient, in terms of wealth, German-speaking Namibians always end up on top of the list. So we've got to take cognizance of that, and we've got to be honest with ourselves. What can we do to maintain the social peace in Namibia? I think that should be really one of our key tasks. And as far as the genocide matter is concerned, we want to contribute constructively to the implementation of this process. Obviously, we've got a limited role to play because we are not an affected community.
Yes.
We are not an extension of the German government. I want to clarify that. We just want to get the message across that we are sincere. We've also not been a party to the joint declaration, to all the negotiations that took part in that. So, but we definitely have a role to play going forward. Whenever we go forward remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But when we go forward, we want to be actively contributing to the national reconciliation. That was also one of the principles after Namibia's independence, and that seems to have been disappearing a little bit from the prominent exposure it's supposed to get. So national reconciliation is of paramount importance. Now, also getting back to Mr. Mungunda's other comment, the sensitivities. We realize that this is a highly, highly, highly sensitive issue.
Yeah.
And I think some paragraphs in the joint declaration are also referring to these highly sensitive issues. And I think even if it is just a small step in the right direction, maybe some progress has been made compared to Germany's stance still 6 years ago, or even longer ago. Okay. Now the question is, obviously we are living in a democratic state here in Namibia, so maybe we just have to await the outcome of the motion when it is tabled in the National Assembly, whether it's rejected or not. But whichever way we are going, we are there to hear other people's and the affected communities' concerns, and we are also there to be heard. So we want to offer our hand. Let's try and map the way forward for Namibia to continue on peace and stability, because I don't think that anybody would want anything else. But we understand that all the comments that we are getting is that the financial remuneration part is not enough, has not been addressed adequately. Some are saying we are prepared to accept it as a qualification because there's more in the pipelines. Others are saying we are rejecting it outright. All the opposition parties seem to reject it. So what do we do with that? It is really, really very difficult.
Yeah.
But there's a fight in the Namibian House, or
Yeah.
potentially disagreement in the Namibian House. We see ourselves as being part of the Namibian House, even though we only occupy a little room in that Namibian House. So we want to really play a part in constructively resolving this issue.
Yeah. A quick follow-up question, Harald. What has happened so far is Germany as a state extending their hand as short as it is in the view of others, of many people. That is Germany on its part. The question that I've always asked is to say, I mean, there's no question. You say that as a community you are privileged, you always come out on all the indices of the economy, you always come out top as a community, and there's a history to that. So I'm wondering is to say, apart from the offer that Germany itself as a state has made, is there anything at all that you think the German-speaking community here in Namibia can also do to improve on the concept of reconciliation, not just by word of mouth, but in practical terms?
Yes, I think they should. There are a lot of projects already, which may not be known to the general public, okay? But the forum also sees itself as a platform for trying to facilitate that. If there are organizations from Germany that want to invest into schools or soup kitchens, for instance, into improving the social life of the Namibian population, then it can hopefully be channeled through the forum in future. But there's obviously a lot more that can be done. I mean, I touched on that earlier on. Related or byproduct of this whole topic is the structural inequality that we got in this country. And that relates right back to 1904. That's where it started. So that structural inequality is still a given in this country. And if we cannot solve that, then we've got a problem. So we must narrow that gap between the haves and the have-nots. And this is one of the key objectives of the forum, is to be seen to be getting involved in that.
Indeed. Vetu, what is it that, apart from the political and everything else, the rhetoric and everything that we are talking about, is there anything specific that you think, a role that in practical terms the German-speaking Namibians can also play as beneficiaries of what transpired during the 1904, 1908?
Yeah. No, I think very much, and I really, I welcome and as an individual, the formation of the forum. And I also welcome the engagement by the community in terms of the social issues. But I would also, just as I said earlier, I think particularly from this forum, would really just expect great caution. I was actually reading an article that was in the Namibian around June, where Harald was quoted as saying that the negotiations were conducted in good faith and what, and I think that doesn't help in terms of the reconciliations with the affected community, because the affected communities and the majority are saying they've got a problem with the process, they've got a problem with an outcome. And I think if you're doing that, you're actually becoming an extension of the German state. And it's actually an enactment of the perpetration of that same genocide, because the number of the affected communities are actually in very, very small minorities today because of the big numbers of people that were killed. When it goes to parliament, it actually, their numbers actually don't matter today because of the genocide. And we're using the language of, democratic state that does not take into account the wishes of the majority of the affected communities. And that will actually be a continuation of the act of genocide extended over the last 100 years. And then it will just be another step in that. So what I think, my plea is that the forum can play, firstly in terms of the genocide itself, play quite a role in terms of genuine understanding of the impact, genuine understanding of the aspirations and wishes. And there is definitely a big group of people that feel left out, but also genuinely wanting to find a resolution. But that doesn't mean that it has to be forced through democratic processes. And I would really believe that the German-speaking forum, the Forum for the German-speaking Namibians, will be a great calibrator of, because of, how close and probably will be better understood by the German state, and also on the ground. I think it will be a great help in terms on the genocide issue.
Yeah.
But I think broadly in terms of other issues, in terms of the general inequality in the country, is it is always going to be difficult, because what happens, the inequality in Namibia is a social engineering project. Yeah. Firstly with genocide, and then secondly with apartheid. And to undo that is always going to be extremely difficult. Part of the challenges is also the fact that if you were to try and undo that in a manner that you kind of leave it to the market forces, as it were, it will not happen. So there must be some interventions, but I would actually think that the interventions are not necessarily projects. as we've heard. And also, I think Harald spoke to Mr. Pollen saying Namibia cannot consume all the projects. And I think for me, that's actually also that patronizing mindset from Germany and also from some sectors that I do you wrong, I take everything you had, take all your land, I take all your cattle, I take all the livelihood items that will provide the livelihood and prosperity for you. And then when later I come back and say, I'm not going to actually give you back the house, I'm not going to give you all of these things what we took away from you, but what I would rather do is I will actually assess your needs. And what you need today is porridge, bucket water, and I'm going to give it to you. And this is the concept that Germany has come up with, that we are falling for. And I think what I would actually appreciate, I think, from the forum is to try and see how do we steer away from projects, but we actually still, get into where we do real investments that will create genuine prosperity rather than doing handouts. Because all that is just continuing perpetuity from a poverty perspective.
Yeah. Just before you go back to Harald, a quick question to you, Mr. Mungunda. I can't remember which month, but not too long ago, after this deal was announced, I think it was announced in May, so you must have been quoted in Namibian Sun around June or so, where you equated this deal to Nekataldem. You said the margins were very small between what is being offered by Germany and what has cost government to construct Nekataldem. But that is besides the point. The point is...
Can I actually... Harald is actually a student of finance, like myself.
Yes.
That's where we agree.
And what you have is you've got 18 billion. So forget about the figure. The figure is actually so small in relation to the damage. Okay, that's one thing. So 18 billion, it's paid over 30 years. So the present value of that amount is only 6 billion. And that's the amount of money we took to build Nekataldem. So for all the genocide, for all of those people that were killed, for all the land that was taken, over 40 million or 30 million hectares of land, it's just one piece of Nekataldem that is being given to this community. A Nekataldem that is not even producing anything.
Yeah. I hear you. Please, if there's anything that you want to say in particular, back to what has been said.
The financial calculations have also been done by colleagues of us in the German-speaking community, and the amount is probably very much on the low side. Okay, it's probably fair to say that. Okay, the question is how much is a life not priceless? How do you quantify that? Okay, and there have also been comments from members of your community that said as long as we would have been involved in the process of negotiation from day one, and even if the outcome would have been €1 only, we could have gone back to our communities and said this is all we could achieve, but we were part of the negotiations from day one. So I think that is really a critical point that needs to be addressed. Why were certain communities from a perception point of view left out, or deliberately left out, or chose not to take part? So I'm also struggling with that concept. Did they deliberately choose not to take part? Were they left out? And then you have some that took part and they don't accept the outcome, and you have some that took part and they do accept the outcome. So you've got really 4 or 5 groups. I also agree with Junius that this is not a process which we can just put to bed by a simple majority in Parliament, because it's got profound implications for the future of Namibia. Ideally, one would have a unilateral support for the motion like we had in 2006 when Chief Kuaima Riraku tabled the bill. I think there was unanimous consent to pursue this matter. So it would be great if Parliament could accept this unanimously, to have that sign that yes, the elected leaders are behind this. Then you've still got some of the affected communities that are not represented in Parliament, because Junior said rightly, some of their numbers have been diminished because of the events of 1904 to 1908. They are insignificant. They are not represented in Parliament. So, yes, it is definitely And I'm learning in this process every day. The forum is newly established. Let's continue with the process of dialogue. Let's engage. But as far as the projects are concerned, that it is just another level of projects that are coming on top of the development aid. I also fully support that we need additional engagement. Okay, we need additional engagement, and we as a forum are looking at hosting a symposium at the beginning of January in Swakopmund. We want to sensitize the German-speaking business community, but will not just be limited to the German-speaking business community, about things like the basic income grant, what options are available to uplift the communities meaningfully. That is, I think, what you said, substantially, not just stopping the blood loss, but looking at why are there still wounds? Why is, stopping the blood loss is a human thing that you have to do, but you must also sometimes go a step back and have a look at the causes of the blood loss, and if we can engage on that. So that is also where we need government's involvement, and so I think what we need to strive at is to have this concept of a one Namibia, one nation again, where German-speaking Namibians and Ovaherero and Nama-speaking Namibians and Ovamo-speaking, everybody comes together and tries and move forward. This one is obviously a topic for the affected communities, and how will we solve this? There is no instant recipe for this, but I saw the joint declaration as a step in the right direction.
Indeed. We go for a quick break and then come back for the last stretch of the show. We continue with the last part of the show. Mr. Mungunda, one of the remarks that the president made when Harald and members of his forum went to see him at State House was that you can't put a price to lives. Those were the words of the president when he was answering now to those who are saying that the 18.4 billion is a drop in the ocean. How do you react to that? Because you mentioned figures earlier on. In fact, here you said in June, either the colleagues who are putting this agreement for consideration cannot think in trillions, and it goes on like that. How do you react to that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with the sentiments around you cannot put a figure to the loss of lives. And that's why the healing, genuine healing, actually becomes very, very important.
Yeah.
And the genuine healing process also starts with how the negotiations are conducted, the discussions that actually leads up to an arrangement. Because remember, healing is a healing between parties. And part of that healing, which is also not actually included in the joint declaration forum, and if you have seen any other arrangements of reparations, there is actually a genuine process to account for what happened. That's not on here. So who was giving orders on what day to do what? How many people were killed where? And that whole process of how much livestock was taken by women and where was it given, to whom was it given, to which person, which land was taken from whom or from which clan, and it was given to who. So these truth is important for healing. But when it comes to, so that's why, and when people say that, they actually say that figuratively. They don't say that literally. When they say you can't put a monetary value to human life.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can, and there's precedent for that. If you go back even into 1990, the U.S. government paid Japanese Americans an amount of money for every life lost. So there is a process, there is precedent, and I think any student of accounting and finance will be able to actually quantify, based on a number of assumptions, quantify, amounts based on, what could have happened. So it's not impossible. It is very possible. There is precedent, but I think what His Excellency would have meant probably was that the healing part and the truth part is very, very important. Yeah.
Indeed. Harald, one of the things that Mr. Mungunda said earlier on is he hinted at the role that the forum can play to, of course, I think there's general consensus that the loudest voice in the room must be that of the affected communities. But there is a facilitation or catalyst sort of role that the forum can play, especially with the German government. You're not a party to it, you're not directly engaging the German government, but I'm sure there's so much silent observations that the Germans are making from your forum to say the attitude of the forum can also somehow influence how Germany eventually end up, where they will end as far as this deal is concerned. Do you accept that if you have a, because the thing is, it's not the forum that is paying anything. And for me, I don't know, as a layman, if Germany was actually paying more than what has been proposed so far, the pressure on the German-speaking community in Namibia will even be less, because I assume that if you provide more billions, nobody will say, for example, I want a portion of Harald's farm, because I've been taken care of in some other ways by the German government itself. Do you think that that is a valid argument? You are shaking your head. Maybe you can explain.
First of all, I don't have a farm. So I'm not sure whether the financial amount is going to change our perception or our aims and objectives. We want to heal the wounds, and that is where I'm with Junius. Okay, we want to heal the wounds, and we must talk to the affected communities, and we must get together and talk about steps that can be taken to address the healing of the wounds. Because fact of the matter is, for instance, which I can vouch for, is that the genocide was not really covered as prominently in the history books. Because the history books are always tainted and painted by somebody that is in control and in power at the time. I know, for instance, that at DHPS, which is a prominent German private school, there has been an effort made to correct, the history books and also reflect on the genocide. And this is what I'm referring to as sensitizing of the community. It starts at various levels. At school level, it starts within the business community. It starts off with us being brokers, potentially, and we are, for German investors, because with the common denominator of the German language, we can assist German investors coming here, not just painting Namibia as a country where you cannot invest, and NEP is hanging as a sword amongst on top of us, and we don't know what's going to happen. Please don't invest in Namibia. No, we are trying to promote Namibia. So this is where we can play a role. And it's a process. I can just always re-emphasize that, and we are prepared to start that process. And the healing of the wounds will take many more years than the potential agreement or joint declaration that might be signed at a certain point in time. Getting to that one, we made an assumption that when we were quoted in the newspapers in June, that it had the bilateral, it was a bilateral agreement. Both parties got a mandate from their respective parliaments or committees that there was a wider acceptance to this joint declaration at the time. We then realized that there were a lot of voices against it. So we can't just ignore those voices. They are legitimate voices, but we must try and constructively and actively be a part of getting this process to some point of potential conclusion.
Indeed. Vetumbuavi, what did you make of the demonstrations that we saw this week regarding this issue as Parliament geared up to start discussing this matter?
Yeah. No, I think the demonstrations it's not a surprise, because maybe what Germany doesn't know, and some people don't know, is the participation of the affected communities was not there. The affected communities were not supportive of how the process were conducted, and also how, and obviously also with the outcome. And this is a majority, and we're not talking about like 51-50. And if they want, they can actually do a census amongst the affected communities. It is probably to the order of 90% against, 80% against. So obviously COVID would probably have not really given the real numbers of the people. Yeah. But that's, that feeling has been there for the last 5 years. And the affected communities were just demanding one simple thing, and it's restorative justice. Restorative justice means, firstly, there must be justice in terms of the process. I cannot reconcile with you if you're saying that the problem is between the two of us, but then you tell me that I'm not going to talk to you, I'm going to talk to your uncle. And then the two of you talk, and then later on you say, oh, you have settled. Yeah. It doesn't work, because then there's not going to be a healing from my part, and there's not going to be a reconciliation from my part. So I think the process is important. And any leadership literature will tell you a bad process will always give a bad outcome. And if you try and rehash this thing again through the same process, it will give you the same bad outcome.
The argument, sorry for interrupting you, Genius, the argument has been sometimes that Dr. Z. Ngabirwe is a member of the Ovaherero community. Of course, I don't know how the process of appointing him started, because I suppose what would have satisfied people is that the community at large have some sort of consensus on who should represent their interest. So I don't know whether the appointment of Dr. Ngabirwe, may his soul rest in peace, satisfies that requirement. There are also representatives of the Nama communities on this committee that engaged Germany. What is not satisfactory about being represented by those two members?
Yeah. So I think, just starting off with Dr. Ngabirwe, which has always and will always remain a respected member of the Namibian society, and also of the Ovaherero community, and a great uncle to many of us, and a great inspiration and a hero to many of us. But the challenge is that, and this is actually the law of agency in any business, and we will know that, is that when someone is talking on their own behalf, as opposed to being part of a government team, because those were members of a government negotiating team. Yeah. And I think maybe the one thing that is lost to many of the people that listen to these things is that, remember, there is actually even some kind of trust that has to be developed between the affected communities and firstly Germany, because Germany has been there for 120 years. They did what they did, but they never cared, they never looked back, they have never tried to do any one small simple thing. Yeah. So why today? So what they will do, as you have seen with this agreement, is that they will do everything possible to not worry and care about the affected communities. That's not their interest. So they will actually need to be forced into doing what is right. At the same time, also, our government, if you look at the last 30 years, there has actually been really nothing significant done in terms of the genocide issue. This was something that was actually being driven by the affected communities. So when it comes to negotiating, you actually had two parties that were reluctant disinterested parties negotiating and talking to themselves, but excluding the affected communities. The members of the negotiating team, some of them great friends of mine that we've been together with since childhood, we're together in student politics together. I know them, and I also know that they mean very, very well and will do everything possible for the African communities. But they are part of a system. And that system answers not to the affected communities, it answers to different parties. And that's a challenge. And that's why, and I think to Harald's earlier point, is the affected communities were asking that they also have a team that negotiate on their own behalf, not as part of a government team. But in terms of the structure of that, they can still report through the same envoy, and government kind of coordinate that. But when they agree or disagree, that agreement or disagreement is not a process of a government decision-making, but it's a process of the affected communities' decision-making. And I think that's really the subtle but very, very important difference.
So as we edge close towards the end of the show, Harald, there is no question whatsoever that we are at a tipping point as a country. And everybody has to come to the party in some way. And your forum and your community has actually probably one of the biggest roles to really soften the entire process towards eventual healing. What can we expect from the forum? I know that it's a new forum, you haven't met a lot. You have a symposium lined up for January. What kind of outcomes do you expect from some of these engagements that can then be taken back to other stakeholders and say, look, as a community, this is what we are willing to do in terms of our small role towards the greater result of this whole thing?
We would like to continue with the route of dialogue that we started. We spoke to representatives of the affected communities on both sides, the ones that are rejecting the agreement outright, the joint declaration, and the ones that are not. So we would like to continue with that dialogue because we see ourselves as a forum where we try and harmonize the German-speaking Namibians' opinions, gather their views, and then speak on behalf of not the entire German-speaking community. We'll never be able to do that, but at least a section of the German-speaking community of Namibia. The healing of the wounds that Junius has referred to will be a process that we have to look at. I'm not just now, he's made it pertinently clear that the process was flawed from day one, if I can call it that, and that's why the healing of the wounds process cannot start now or will only start later. So I'm not sure whether we have to look at an entirely new process or whether we have to renegotiate. But whatever role could come up for us, and by the way, we've not been approached as yet by anybody of the German government, what is your view, but I think they are taking notice of us. And this is our stance right now. We are welcoming every opportunity where we can get more publicity. We were on a trip of introducing ourselves to all the institutions here in Windhoek, and this is why we also asked for a visit to President Hage Geingob, which was granted to us. So this is all start of the process. We want to get better known, but we are not closing any doors. We want to continue on the process of dialogue and play our little, potentially insignificant role, bearing in mind the history of this country, the privileged elements of our German-speaking Namibian society also have to come to the party and become actively involved. But once again, there's also resistance within some of the German-speaking community of Namibia who are saying, what are you doing? This is just a talk about money. So the sensitization process we will continue, and it doesn't stop today. And I would like to maybe share some ideas with Junius after this interview on the next steps, or we can maybe even talk about it now. When do we get together again? Do we get together as individuals and talk about it over a cup of coffee? Do we try and get a roadmap of potential steps that can be done? Because we also are definitely in agreement that the healing of wounds is of paramount importance.
Indeed. Mr. Mungunda, I'm giving you the last throw of the dice to close off. What is it that you would like to see happen going forward? There is so much disagreement. The emotions are very, very high. What is the ideal outcome of this whole thing that you would like to see?
No, I think, as I said, the healing is important, and in order to get to a healing, the process, the environment, the semantics that are being used, and also listening really to people is going to be very, very important. So there should be no need to want to rush things. But I must also say that, as Harald said, I also agree fully that it is quite a great achievement that there has been some kind of acknowledgement by the German government in terms of the genocide. So I believe that it is an achievement by the flawed negotiating process. But I think the forum that Harald has spoken on behalf of, I believe is going to be quite an important, it can be an important calibrator, provided they also understand the issues. And I really believe that there's a need for that. Yeah. So I think, just to give you an example, they are privileged. Yeah. They were able to see our president. But if you look at the chiefs of some of the African communities, you have seen clips of some of them said they have been trying to see the president for the last 2 or 3 years. This is a one-year forum, and it's been able to see the president. At the same time, if you actually go to the joint declaration, that joint declaration quotes a resolution, a Bundestag resolution of 1989. And in that resolution, the Bundestag resolution actually says, it talks to their responsibility is to protect the interests of the minority German-speaking people in Namibia. So Germany's interest all along has been to protect the interest of the very few German-speaking Namibians, the beneficiaries of the genocide. And we have quoted, and I don't know how our negotiators could have quoted that resolution in this, if it is all about really resolving some of these issues. So I do believe that the forum could play quite a good role. I also believe that our decision makers will have an opportunity to really listen out. And I also believe that all parties on all ends will have to kind of really pull together, listen to each other. And the solution is always somewhere in the middle. It's not on either ends of that. And I do hope that whatever is going to happen now will create a process of genuine negotiations and genuine discussions and listening to each other, so that an outcome that is reasonable and that actually heals wounds can be achieved.
Indeed. I think this has been a very fruitful conversation, gentlemen. I really appreciate your presence tonight. And who knows, as things unfold, maybe we can regroup again and have a conversation. I'm particularly happy that even if we were not at all times singing from the same hymn book, we were able to have this civilized conversation, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Junius. I like the tonality of this discussion. We can agree to disagree, but I think we also found a few points where we do agree, and let's maybe maximize those areas.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
And just to, as we close, I mean, Harald's, we spent like the last 15 years together at the sports fields.
Okay.
So there is something to work from. There's a basis.
There's a basis. There's a starting point. Now, thank you. That has been Harald Hecht and Vetumbuavi Mungunda engaging us tonight on the subject of genocide. Thank you for watching.
You're feeling how I'm feeling and you know I won't stop. All we gotta do is take our love to the top. If I got it and you want it and you'll never let it drop. All we gotta do is take our love to the top. I will ride for you, maybe even die for you. When I'm loving you, but my heart don't stop.